Hello, everybody. I really wanted to have a video titled My Problem with the Apostle Paul. And in this video, I would really like to stress 3 points of some of the ways that I believe that the Apostle Paul has really made a mistake in his writing. Or perhaps it was just that the letters that were collected of his writings were somehow a progression of his own faith developing. So before I go into my problems with the Apostle Paul, I would really like to say what I think that the Apostle Paul does that's right. Because obviously, one of the reasons why the gospel ever came to the Gentile world was through the sweat, blood, and persecution of the Apostle Paul. That man was tough, and it took somebody who was really that tough to really make the gospel spread in that particular way. So I have absolutely no problems with honoring the Apostle Paul as a man who was truly godly. So that's something to always consider. There's a need for respect for a really great man, and he was a really really great man. But the three problems that I really have with the Apostle Paul are that when you look at anybody's writings, you have to look. I mean, as far as religious or biblically speaking, because obviously there's lots of different things to look at. You have to look at Genesis, the very beginning of mankind, how mankind fell, and then you see the progression of the revelation of God and who He is, which is constantly growing, and it's still growing, all the way to Jesus, who really came to clarify that He had come to completely and totally wipe out all the curses that happened to mankind in the Garden of Eden. That means He wipes out all the boo boos, all the mistakes, all the curses, all these things. He came to do it all. So when you look at the Apostle Paul and you look at his writings and some of the ways that he rightfully tried to organize his own church, he had the right to sort of create his own church and how to organize it. But he makes two really major mistakes with women. One, he states that women should always stay underneath submission to man, not because of just simply the fact that man is reflecting the ultimate Godhead, and there has to be some kind of an authority structure. He basically states and puts it to an extreme where women have no ability to teach a man or have any authority over a man, and so on and so forth. And the reason he gives is because women in the garden were tricked by the devil into eating the apple or the forbidden knowledge. So, he gives that excuse. But when you look at the fact that Jesus Christ came to completely abolish all of the penalties and the curses that stemmed from the Garden of Eden, you understand that, well, there's something wrong with that belief where he might have really forgotten to apply grace to women. So that's something that can happen to any of us, and that's something that we can definitely see has followed the church throughout the whole Gentile world, where grace has been something that has been a privilege of man, not so often applied to women and the mistakes of women. So we definitely can see where the Apostle Paul could have grown in his understanding of grace in regards to how it applies to women. The second really big mistake that I see that he really makes is in regards to salvation to women. Now, some of this might have been a mistake, and some of it might have been simply very practical, because in some ways, it was good advice that the Apostle Paul gave to women, or an insight that he had in regards to women that was unfortunately not really full of grace. And that was, he said that women would find salvation through childbirth. And in a way, I believe that's right. I believe that salvation has been so difficult for women to find, and partially because the grace of God has been so withheld from her in her life, that salvation has been extremely hard for a woman to attain to. And anytime a woman comes close, unfortunately, you have collective man who sort of hops on her and tries to block the road to salvation. So we definitely see that. So in some ways, he was right. But if we once again go back to the fact that salvation is through belief in Jesus Christ alone, and that his blood completely cleanses us from all sins, and that's what really grants us salvation. We understand that once again, either Paul was seeing just the sad truth that there was no way for women to gain salvation unless it was through childbearing, or he once again forgot to apply all these things to women. So when we look at these two things, we can definitely see where either he was, he might just not have grown quite that in his own vision, and a person can only grow so much in their lifetime, and maybe that was all he could take. So I'm certainly not trying to be a snot to him, because I still think he was a great man, and I still think we have so much to be grateful to him for. The third thing that I find to be a little bit of an issue is that I don't know if this had to do with like the progression of his own understanding of grace and mercy, but when you have really extreme writings such as to abstain all appearances of evil, abstain from it. That means anything anyone could possibly ever consider to be evil or wrong or bad or wicked or socially taboo should be avoided at all costs. But then you have the Bible verse about how with the lawless you should be lawless, with the people who live underneath the law you should live as if you are underneath the law. And to me, what the last verse said is completely correct, because I believe that love should be our absolute top priority. Finding that perfect love is what makes us perfect. We cannot be perfect in following rules. That's the knowledge of good and evil and trying to find salvation through following rules. But we can love our brothers and sisters. And so if we're talking to a really uptight religious pastor, we might, for their own desire to seek after a certain lifestyle, try to withhold a little bit in our language or in some of the things that we do or say so that we don't offend them and turn them away from us. But then if you're with somebody who has had life kick the snot out of them, and either they had no better options available to them, and except for really poor options, and they took the very best of the options that were made available to them, and it still kicked the snot out of them, and it still hurt them, and maybe they're a lot more relaxed in the way that they live, or maybe they found some kind of hope in their darkness in some ways that are socially taboo or really bad. And if you're like this person, like, oh no, I never do that, I am just way too good to do that, all of a sudden you're not being loving. You're really taking a knife to somebody and you're stabbing them in the heart. So I definitely see that verse as being completely correct. But when you really analyze this whole abstaining any appearance of evil, to me, in order to really discern what evil really is, the only thing that I can really come to the conclusion is, well, what is cruel to yourself or to another person? What's going to destroy you? What's going to destroy another person? What's going to hurt you? What's going to hurt another person? And to me, some of the things that especially pastors or preachers really preach on in regards to purity, I sort of kind of have this feeling that as beautiful as what they're saying or attaining to is, and if we can shelter people and ourselves from some of the worst things of life, I think that's just that's wonderful. But the truth of the matter is that if we're really assuming that a person is bad or wicked because they are caught up in a lifestyle that doesn't make them happy, and they can't really do much about it, it really doesn't really help very much. So I think that when we make rules for ourselves to live by, we have to really, really analyze and ask ourselves, is this actually going to benefit anybody? If I restrict myself and eating meat, is this really going to benefit anybody? If I restrict myself from drinking alcohol, is this actually going to be a benefit to anybody? Or is it just going to cause people to feel really, really crappy about themselves for those who do drink? You know, why do I wear this particular dress or these particular clothes, or why won't I wear those particular things or clothes or whatever? I think that we should always be looking at things and situations in this particular light. And so I think a lot of Christians and people are drawn towards creating rules. And I'm like, let's kick down all the rules. Like, it's not that I'm like this inward rebel. It's just that I see what happens to people who make rules and try to enforce them through withholding love, withholding goodness, withholding, any kind of good experiences that another person can have. And I just see that rules destroy people. So, I really, really have this feeling that the church really needs to sit down and really look at the Apostle Paul's writings. And I really think that they need to find out if, him all of a sudden, like going from super, super, super religious Jew to the Apostle Paul, who was being persecuted, beaten out of his mind most of the time, had been through so much pain, so much suffering. Some of the things that he said could have really been wrong. It could have just been what he knew at the time. And I think that the only way to really find that out is to first take away the idea that he was infallible. Because every person is fallible. Every person can be wrong. Every person only has a piece of the puzzle. So first we have to take that out of our perspective. And then the second one, we have to really analyze what he said against what he said. We have to analyze what he said against what Jesus said. And we also have to analyze what he said versus what happened in Genesis. And it's only then, when you really make sure that everything is in agreement with each other, that you can really state that it's true or not. So that is my problem with the Apostle Paul. Not that hard to find women who have a problem with the Apostle Paul, but I will perhaps get into that in another video.